Lyra didn't know that the wounded stranger she found bleeding in the forest was the most powerful alpha in the realm. She didn't know that his golden eyes held the weight of kingdoms, or that his rough hands had signed treaties that shaped the fate of millions. And she certainly didn't know that when she pressed her palms against his torn flesh to heal him, she was sealing both their destinies with threads of light that would bind them forever. She only knew that someone was dying, and she couldn't let that happen. Not again. The memory crashed into her like a physical blow, dragging her back to that terrible night 3 years ago. Marcus standing over her, his face twisted with rage. "You're nothing, Lyra, nothing. A broken little girl playing at being useful." His hand had connected with her cheek, the sound echoing in their tiny cottage. "You think your pathetic healing gift makes you special? You're worthless, damaged goods that no one could ever want." She'd believed him. God help her! She'd believed every poisonous word. The sound of approaching footsteps snapped her back to the present. Lyra looked up from her herb garden, her hands still dirt-stained from pulling weeds, to see a figure emerging from the tree line. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the predatory grace of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous thing in any room. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that silhouette, those powerful shoulders, the way he held himself like he was carrying the weight of the world. The stranger from the forest, the one whose life she'd saved 6 months ago with healing magic she'd sworn never to use again. But he was supposed to be gone, disappeared back into whatever life powerful men lived when they weren't bleeding out in remote forests. She told herself it was better that way, safer. Kyle stepped into the clearing where her small cottage sat, and the late afternoon sunlight caught the gold in his dark hair. Those impossible amber eyes found hers across the garden, and something deep in her chest pulled tight. A golden thread of warmth that she'd been trying to ignore for months suddenly flared to life. "Hello, Lyra." His voice was exactly as she remembered. Deep, rough around the edges, patient. She scrambled to her feet, wiping her hands on her worn apron, acutely aware of how she must look. Hair escaping its braid, dirt under her fingernails, wearing the same faded dress she'd owned for years. Everything about her screamed peasant, common, nothing. "You shouldn't be here," she managed, backing toward her cottage door. Every instinct she'd developed over 3 years of hiding screamed at her to run. Powerful men were dangerous. They took what they wanted and left destruction in their wake. "I've been looking for you." He stopped walking, holding his hands where she could see them. "For months." "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Cale's golden eyes never left her face. "Because you're my mate, Lyra, and I've been waiting my whole life to find you." The words landed like a physical blow. Mate. The one word that could shatter her carefully constructed walls and send her spiralling back into panic. She shook her head, the movement sharp and desperate. "No!" Her voice cracked. "No, that's impossible. I'm nobody. I'm a village healer who lives alone and bothers no one. You're—" She gestured helplessly at him, at the obvious power radiating from his very presence. "You're clearly someone important. There's been a mistake." "There's no mistake." His voice remained gentle, but she could hear something fierce underneath. "I can feel it. I know you can too. That pull between us, that warmth. It's the bond, Lyra." She could feel it. God, she could feel it like a living thing in her chest, calling to him, wanting to close the distance between them, and that terrified her more than anything. "I'm not ready!" The words tumbled out of her in a rush of panic. "I can't do this! I'm not ready for this! I may never be ready for this!" She was backing away faster now, her shoulders hitting the rough wood of her cottage wall. Trapped, just like before. Just like with Marcus when he'd cornered her and made her feel small and broken and... Kyle stopped moving immediately. His hands rose slowly, palms out, and he took a deliberate step backward. "It's all right." His voice was impossibly gentle. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to force anything." Lyra's breath was coming in short, sharp gasps. Her healing magic was responding to her panic, golden light flickering around her fingers like trapped lightning. "You don't understand. I'm damaged, broken. I'm not what you think I am." "You saved my life," Kyle said quietly. "You knelt in the mud and blood and poured your own strength into healing a stranger. That's not broken, Lyra. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Tears were burning behind her eyes now. "You don't know what I am, what I've done, what's been done to me." "Then tell me." He sank down onto one knee, making himself smaller, less threatening. "But only when you're ready. I meant what I said, Lyra. I'll wait however long you need." She stared at him through her tears. This impossibly powerful man kneeling in her garden dirt, patient as stone. "What if I'm never ready?" she whispered. Kyle's golden eyes held hers, steady and sure, and full of something that looked dangerously like love. "Then I'll wait forever if I have to." The days that followed were a careful dance of proximity and distance. Kyle had taken residence at the Wandering Heart Inn, the village's only lodging establishment that barely qualified for the name. 3 rooms above a tavern that reeked of ale and unwashed bodies. But he stayed. Every morning Lyra would peek through her cottage window and see smoke rising from the inn's chimney. Every evening she'd catch glimpses of his broad silhouette through the tavern's grimy windows. He never approached her cottage again, never cornered her in the market square or demanded her attention. He simply existed in her world, as patient and immovable as the mountains that surrounded their valley, and it was driving her mad. Lyra found herself watching him when she thought no one would notice. The way he helped old Henrik carry sacks of grain without being asked. How he listened with genuine attention when the village children told him rambling stories about their pet rabbits and lost teeth. She watched him buy bread from the baker's wife and actually eat it, not just pick at it like someone accustomed to finer fare. He belonged here somehow, in this forgotten place where nothing important ever happened. It made no sense. "He's not what I expected," Mira said one afternoon, appearing at Lyra's elbow as she pretended to examine apples at the market stall. The baker's daughter had always been too observant for her own good. "I don't know what you mean," Lyra lied, not looking up from the fruit. "The stranger, the one who's been staying at the inn for a week and watching you like you hung the moon." Mira's voice carried that teasing lilt that meant she thought she was being clever. "Jacob thinks he's a merchant, but merchants don't move like that. They don't have scars like that." Lyra's hand stilled on the apples. "Scars? Sword scars, battle scars, the kind you get from fighting wars, not counting coins?" Mira leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Who is he, Lyra?" "Someone too important for me. Someone dangerous. Someone who could break me worse than Marcus ever did." "I don't know," she whispered. And that was the truth, wasn't it? She knew his name was Kyle. She knew he claimed she was his mate. But beyond that, he remained a mystery wrapped in patient gentleness and those devastating amber eyes. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, Lyra found herself drawn to the forest path where she gathered her healing herbs. She told herself she needed feverfew for old Martha's joints. She told herself it had nothing to do with the figure she could see sitting on a fallen log near the clearing where she'd first found him bleeding. Kyle looked up as her footsteps disturbed the carpet of fallen leaves. He didn't smile, but something in his expression softened. "Lyra." She stopped 10 feet away, clutching her gathering basket like a shield. "You're in my herb-gathering spot." "I know." His voice carried that same gentle roughness that did impossible things to her pulse. "I was hoping you might come." "Why?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. When he spoke again, his words carried the weight of profound loneliness. "Do you know what it's like to spend your entire life being seen as a weapon? To have people look at you and see only what you can do for them, or how you might hurt them?" Something in her chest clenched. She did know. She knew what it felt like to be reduced to a single aspect of yourself, to have your worth measured by your usefulness. Yes. I've been alone for a very long time, Lyra. Not physically alone. I'm surrounded by people constantly, but truly alone. And then I found you, or you found me, and for the first time in my life, someone looked at me and saw just me. He turned his golden eyes to hers. Not what I could give them, not what they could gain from knowing me, just me. The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, she took a half-step closer. I don't even know who you are, what you are. Does it matter? It should. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she meant it. When she'd found him bleeding in this very spot, she hadn't cared about his identity or status. She'd only seen someone who needed help, someone in pain. Cale shifted on the log, wincing slightly, and without thinking, Lyra moved closer. Your wound, from before, is it bothering you? It's healed well, thanks to you, but it pulls sometimes when the weather changes. She was close enough now to see the way his shirt stretched across his broad chest, to catch the clean scent of soap and something uniquely him. May I? He went very still. Lyra, you don't have to. May I? She repeated, her healing instincts overriding her fear. Slowly, carefully, Cale lifted the edge of his shirt. The scar was there, pale silver against his tanned skin, running from just below his ribs to his hip. Her magic had knitted the wound closed, but she could sense the lingering tension in the surrounding tissue. Without conscious thought, Lyra reached out and placed her palm flat against his skin. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Golden warmth shot up her arm, spreading through her chest, settling somewhere behind her sternum like a second heartbeat. The bond between them flared to life, sudden and brilliant and impossible to deny. Cale sucked in a sharp breath, his muscles tensing under her touch. Lyra! She could feel his wound easing under her healing touch, but more than that, she could feel him. His strength, his gentleness, the carefully controlled power that hummed beneath his skin. And underneath it all, that bone-deep loneliness that matched her own. God, she gasped, pulling her hand away like she'd been burned. I can't. This is impossible. But Cale caught her wrist gently, his fingers warm against her pulse point. You're not nobody, Lyra. You're everything. The words hit her like a physical blow. She jerked back, her breathing shallow and rapid. You don't understand. I'm just a village healer. I have nothing to offer someone like you. I'm damaged goods, broken in ways that can't be fixed. You healed me. His voice was soft but certain. You saved my life with magic that most healers can only dream of possessing. You're not broken, Lyra. You're extraordinary. Tears burned behind her eyes. You're a king. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she saw recognition flicker across his features. Not surprise, he'd known she'd figured it out, but something like relief. Yes, he said simply, I'm the Alpha King, and you're my mate. The sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the moment between them. Multiple horses moving fast, coming from the direction of the village. Cale was on his feet instantly, every line of his body shifting from gentle suitor to lethal predator. A young man burst into the clearing, his face flushed with exertion and fear. Lyra, thank the gods I found you. He pulled his horse to a stop, the animal dancing nervously. There are riders coming, armed men. They're asking about you. Lyra's blood went cold. After 3 years of peace, 3 years of safety, her past had finally caught up with her. Marcus, she whispered. Cale's golden eyes flashed dangerously. Who is Marcus? But Lyra was already backing away, that familiar terror clawing at her throat. I have to run. I have to disappear again. He can't find me here. He can't... No. Cale's voice cut through her panic, steady and sure. You're not running. Not anymore. You don't understand. Then tell me. He stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring despite the deadly promise in his eyes. Tell me who's coming, and I'll handle it. For the first time since Marcus had convinced her she was nothing, Lyra looked at a powerful man and didn't see a threat. She saw protection. Marcus arrived at sunset with a dozen armed soldiers, their leather and steel gleaming in the dying light. Lyra watched from her cottage window as they rode into the village square like conquerors claiming new territory, their horses' hooves striking sparks from the cobblestones. She recognized him immediately. 3 years had done nothing to soften his cruel features or the way he held himself like he owned everything he looked upon. Her hands trembled as she gripped the window frame, every carefully rebuilt piece of her confidence crumbling at the sight of him. Lyra. Kyle's voice came from behind her, low and deadly calm. He'd materialized in her cottage without her hearing him enter, moving with that predatory silence that reminded her exactly how dangerous he could be when he chose. Get away from the window. He'll see me, she whispered, but she stepped back anyway, letting him guide her toward the back of the cottage with a gentle hand on her arm. "He won't touch you!" The promise in Cale's voice was absolute, backed by a fury that made the air around them feel electric. "I swear it on my life, Lyra, he will never touch you again." Through the thin walls, they could hear Marcus's voice carrying across the square, loud and arrogant and exactly as she remembered. "I'm looking for someone, a woman, auburn hair, green eyes, about this tall, goes by the name Lyra. She's mine and I've come to collect her." Kyle's jaw tightened. "Yours?" "She belonged to me," Lyra said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "He always said I belonged to him, that I was his property to do with as he pleased." The memories came flooding back. Marcus's hands on her, never gentle, always taking. His voice in her ear telling her she was lucky he wanted her at all, broken as she was. "You belong to no one but yourself." Cale's voice was fierce, his golden eyes blazing. "No one owns you, Lyra, no one." But Marcus was still talking outside, his words carrying through the evening air like poison. "She's a healer, useful enough, I suppose, though she needs a firm hand to keep her in line. Tends to get ideas above her station if you're not careful." Several villagers had gathered now. Lyra could hear their murmured conversations. She pressed her back against the cottage wall, wishing she could disappear entirely. "Haven't seen anyone like that," came Henrik's gruff voice. Good, loyal Henrik, who'd never once asked questions about her past or why she'd arrived in their village 3 years ago with nothing but the clothes on her back. "She's here." Marcus's voice carried absolute certainty. "I can smell her magic. Sweet little Lyra always did have a distinct signature to her power, like honey and wildflowers." He paused, and Lyra could picture him surveying the square with those cold, calculating eyes. "I know you're hiding her. No matter. I have all night." Kyle moved toward the door, every line of his body radiating lethal intent. "Stay here." "No." Lyra caught his arm, her fingers digging into the solid muscle beneath his shirt. "You don't understand what he's like. He'll hurt people to get to me. He'll burn the whole village if he has to." "Then I'll stop him." "He has 12 soldiers." "I could handle 12 soldiers with my eyes closed." Kyle turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face with impossible gentleness. "I am the Alpha King, Lyra. There is no one in this realm more powerful than me. He cannot hurt you while I draw breath." The cottage door exploded inward. Marcus filled the doorway like a nightmare made flesh, his dark hair longer than she remembered, his face carrying new scars that spoke of violence and cruelty. His eyes found hers across the small room and lit up with vindictive triumph. "There's my little dove." His voice was exactly as she remembered, smooth and cultured on the surface, with something rotten underneath. "Did you really think you could run from me forever?" Kyle moved in front of her so fast she barely saw him blur, placing his body between her and Marcus like a living shield. "You're not welcome here." Marcus laughed, the sound sending ice through Lyra's veins. "And who might you be? Her new keeper? I hope you've been enjoying my leftovers, friend, but playtime is over. Lyra belongs to me." "She belongs to no one but herself," Cale said, his voice dropping to a register that made the cottage walls seem to vibrate. "Leave. Now. Oh, but you don't understand. Marcus stepped into the cottage, his soldiers filing in behind him. You see, Lyra is damaged goods, broken. I spent 2 years teaching her exactly what she's worth, and it's not much. She's a decent enough healer when properly motivated, and adequate for warming a bed. But she has delusions of being something more than she is. Each word hit Lyra like a physical blow. She could feel herself shrinking, becoming smaller, the confident woman who'd been slowly emerging over the past week, disappearing under the weight of Marcus's familiar cruelty. "She's nothing special," Marcus continued, his voice taking on that tone she remembered so well, the one that made her feel like the most worthless creature alive. A peasant girl with a minor magical talent and ideas above her station. Really, I'm doing you a favour by taking her off your hands. She'll only disappoint you in the end. Stop! The word tore from Lyra's throat before she could stop it. Please, just stop. Marcus's smile was poison. There's my obedient little dove. Are you ready to come home? I've missed having you around to remind me why I'm so much better than everyone else. That was when Kyle exploded into motion. One moment he was standing protectively in front of her, and the next he had Marcus slammed against the cottage wall, one hand wrapped around the other man's throat. The soldiers moved to intervene, but froze when golden light began radiating from Kyle's skin, the unmistakable aura of an alpha in full fury. "You want to know who I am?" Kyle's voice was soft, deadly, each word precisely enunciated. "I am Cale Thorn, Alpha King of the Northern Realm, and this woman is my mate." Marcus's face went white. That's impossible." "She is the strongest, most precious person I have ever encountered," Kyle continued, his grip tightening. "She saved my life with magic more powerful than anything your pathetic mind could comprehend. She is brave and kind and worth more than your entire bloodline combined." Lyra felt something crack open in her chest. No one had ever defended her like this. No one had ever spoken of her worth like it was an undeniable truth rather than a debatable opinion. "He's lying," Marcus gasped, his eyes finding hers. "You know what you are, Lyra. You know exactly how broken you are, how worthless. I made sure of that." And for a moment she almost believed him again, almost let his familiar poison seep back into her bones and make her small. But then she looked at Cale, at the absolute fury in his golden eyes as he held Marcus against the wall, and she remembered. She remembered the way he'd knelt in her garden dirt and promised to wait forever. The way he'd helped village children and listened to their stories. The way he'd shared his own loneliness and made her feel less alone. "You're wrong," she said quietly, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I'm not nothing. I'm a healer. I've saved lives. I've helped people. And I'm not broken." Marcus snarled. "You stupid little—" Cale's hand tightened around his throat. "Choose your next words very carefully." "She came crawling back to me once before," Marcus wheezed, his voice full of vicious satisfaction, even as he struggled to breathe. "When she got tired of playing at independence, she'll do it again. They always do." Something in Cale's expression shifted, becoming absolutely lethal. Did you go back to him?" Lyra met his golden eyes, and for the first time since Marcus had appeared, she felt steady. "Yes, once, because I was scared and alone, and I thought I deserved what he gave me." She took a breath, drawing on strength she hadn't known she possessed. "But I left again, and I've spent 3 years learning who I really am when I'm not being told I'm nothing." Kyle's smile was devastating. "And who is that?" "Someone worth protecting," she said, the words feeling like truth on her tongue for the first time in years. "Someone worth waiting for." The golden bond between them flared to life again, stronger than before, filling the cottage with warm light. Marcus made a choking sound of rage and disbelief. "This is touching," he spat, "but it changes nothing. You can play at being important all you like, but we both know what you really are. And when this king of yours gets bored with his novelty toy, you'll come crawling back just like before." "No." Lyra stepped forward, moving to stand beside Kyle instead of behind him. "I won't, because I'm done letting you define my worth." Marcus's face contorted with fury. "You think you have a choice? I own you, you pathetic little—" "You own nothing." Kyle released Marcus with a shove that sent the other man stumbling backward. "And if you ever speak to her like that again, I'll tear your throat out." But Marcus wasn't finished. He straightened his clothes with shaking hands, his eyes burning with malicious triumph. "You want her? Fine, keep her. But know this, I've got trackers on 3 separate villages that harboured her during her little vacation from reality. If she doesn't return with me voluntarily, those villages burn." The blood drained from Lyra's face. "You're lying." "Am I?" Marcus's smile was pure evil. "Little Millbrook, where you spent those first few months. Riverside, where you tried to set up that pathetic excuse for a healing practice. And this charming place, of course." He gestured around the cottage with mock appreciation. 3 villages, hundreds of innocent people. All of them will die screaming unless you come home where you belong. Lyra felt the world tilting around her. All those people, all those families, children like the ones she'd watched Kyle help in the market square. "I have to go," she whispered. "I can't let them die because of me." "No." Kyle caught her arm. "You're not responsible for his evil." "But I am," she said, tears burning her eyes. "If I hadn't run, if I'd stayed with him from the beginning, none of those people would be in danger." Marcus's laugh was triumphant. "There's my sensible girl. You always did understand the natural order of things." Kyle stepped between them again, his presence like a wall of protective fury. "Get out!" "Not without her. Get out!" The cottage windows rattled with the force of Kyle's command, powered by an alpha's absolute authority. "You have 1 hour to take your men and leave this territory. If you're still here after that, I'll consider it an act of war." Marcus's confidence finally cracked. "You can't—" "I can. I am the Alpha King. This is my realm and you are trespassing." Kyle's golden eyes were glowing now, inhuman and terrifying. "Leave, now, and never return." For a moment, Marcus looked like he might argue further. Then survival instinct finally kicked in, and he backed toward the door, his soldiers following. "This isn't over," he called out. "She'll come to me. When those villages start burning, when innocent blood starts flowing, she'll remember exactly what she is, what she owes me." And then they were gone, leaving only the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance and the scent of fierce sweat lingering in the cottage air. Lyra sank down onto her small wooden chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "He's right. I have to go back. I can't let innocent people die because of my choices." Kyle knelt in front of her, his hands covering hers. "Look at me." She lifted her eyes to his, seeing her own anguish reflected in those golden depths. "We'll find another way," he said firmly. "I promise you, Lyra, there is always another way." The journey to Kyle's stronghold took 3 days, and they were the strangest days of Lyra's life. She'd expected to feel like a prisoner being escorted to a gilded cage. Instead, she found herself discovering what it felt like to be cherished. Kyle rode beside her, close enough to reach out if she needed him, but never crowding her space. He made sure she was warm when the mountain air grew cold, ensured she had the softest bedroll when they made camp, and listened with genuine interest when she pointed out useful herbs growing along the roadside. "You could build an entire apothecary just from what grows wild in these mountains," she said on the second evening, watching him tend their campfire with practiced ease. "Then build one." His golden eyes found hers across the dancing flames. "When this is over, when you're safe, build whatever you want. I'll give you anything you need." The casual way he said it, like her dreams were not only possible, but inevitable, made something flutter in her chest. "You don't even know what I want." "Then tell me." Kyle leaned back against a fallen log, his attention completely focused on her. What would you do if you could do anything? If there were no threats, no one trying to hurt you, no past casting shadows over your future? Lyra pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, considering. No one had ever asked her that question before. Marcus had always been very clear about what she would do, what she was allowed to want. I'd have a real healing centre, not just me working alone in a cottage, but a place where other healers could come to learn, where we could pool our knowledge and help more people. She paused, then added quietly, I'd help women like me, the ones who've been broken and convinced they're worthless. Women like you, who are actually incredibly strong and just need someone to remind them of it, Kyle said softly. You don't know that I'm strong. You survived 2 years with him. You escaped. You built a new life for yourself from nothing. You saved my life even though helping a stranger put you at risk. His voice was absolute certainty. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Lyra. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But 3 years of healing couldn't erase the deeper wounds that easily. What if I can never be what you need? What if I'm too broken to be anyone's mate, let alone a king's? Kyle was quiet for so long, she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability that made her breath catch. When I was 16, I watched my father execute my mother for treason. The words hit her like a physical blow. Kyle? She wasn't guilty of anything except trying to protect refugees from a war my father started, but he needed a scapegoat and she was convenient. Kyle's hands clenched into fists. I stood there and watched him kill the only person who'd ever shown me genuine love, and I couldn't stop it. I wasn't strong enough, wasn't powerful enough, wasn't enough. Lyra's heart ached for the boy he'd been, forced to witness something so terrible. That doesn't make you broken, doesn't it? He met her eyes, and she saw decades of carefully hidden pain in those golden depths. I've spent 20 years becoming exactly what he was, a weapon, a killer, someone people fear. I've convinced myself it was necessary, that being cruel was the only way to protect my people. But the truth is, I became everything I hated because it was easier than risking love again. And now? Now I've found my mate, and she's terrified of being touched. She flinches when I move too quickly, apologizes for taking up space, believes herself worthless. His voice cracked slightly. What if I can never give you the gentleness you need? What if 20 years of being a monster has broken me beyond repair? Lyra stared at him across the firelight. This powerful, patient man who'd shown her nothing but kindness, convinced he was the broken one. You knelt in my garden dirt and promised to wait forever. You've spent 3 days making sure I was comfortable and safe. You've never once raised your voice to me or made me feel small. She took a shaky breath. If you're broken, Kyle, then you're broken in beautiful ways. Something shifted in the air between them. The golden bond that connected them pulsed with warmth, stronger than it had ever been before. Without conscious thought, Lyra found herself moving around the fire to sit beside him on the fallen log. We're quite a pair, she said softly, the king who thinks he's a monster and the healer who thinks she's worthless. Maybe we can remind each other of the truth, Kyle murmured. His hand moved slowly toward hers, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers intertwined with hers, and the bond between them sang. For a moment, it felt like everything might actually be possible. Then the sound of approaching horses shattered their fragile peace. Kyle was on his feet instantly, moving between Lyra and the darkness beyond their firelight. How many? 20, maybe more. His senses were sharper than hers, honed by years of warfare. Too many to be travelling merchants. Lyra's blood went cold. Marcus! No. Kyle's voice was grim. Marcus doesn't have this many men. This is someone else. The riders emerged from the tree line like wraiths, their armour gleaming in the firelight. At their head rode a man with silver hair and cold blue eyes that Lyra recognised from Kyle's description. Lord Commander Thane. his most trusted general. "Your Majesty." Thane dismounted with military precision. "We received your message about the threat to the villages." "That was fast," Kale said carefully. "We were already mobilized. There's been a development." Thane's eyes flicked to Lyra, then back to his king. "Marcus Voss has allied himself with the Shadow Court. He's not just threatening 3 villages anymore. He's laid siege to the capital." The world tilted around Lyra. "What?" "He's demanding the return of what he calls his stolen property in exchange for lifting the siege." Thane's voice was carefully neutral. "If his demands aren't met by dawn in 3 days, he'll begin executing civilians." Lyra struggled to breathe. This was her fault, all of it. Because she'd run, because she'd been selfish enough to want freedom, innocent people were going to die. "I have to go back to him." "Absolutely not." Kyle's voice cut through her rising panic. "You don't understand. I understand perfectly." He turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite gentleness. "You think this is your fault. You think you have to sacrifice yourself to save others. But this isn't about you, Lyra. This is about power. Marcus wants me to hand over my mate, to show weakness, to prove he can make the Alpha King bend to his will. People will die. People will die if we give him what he wants too. Do you think he'll stop with you? Do you think he'll be satisfied with destroying just your life?" Kyle's thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "He's allied with the Shadow Court, Lyra. This was never about you. This was about finding a way to hurt me. Because I'm your weakness. No." His voice was fierce, absolute. "You're my strength." Thane cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, there's something else. Our scouts report that Marcus has been spreading word that the Alpha King's mate is a damaged human who seduced him with dark magic. He's claiming you're unfit to rule because you've been ensorcelled." Lyra felt something cold settle in her stomach. "He's trying to destroy your reputation." "He's trying to start a civil war," Kyle corrected grimly, "and he's using our bond to do it." "Then break it." The words came out before she could stop them, each one feeling like tearing out a piece of her heart. "Break our bond. Tell everyone it was a mistake, that I tricked you somehow. Save your kingdom." The look of devastation that crossed Kyle's face was worse than anything Marcus had ever done to her. "Is that what you want?" "It doesn't matter what I want," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's what's right." "Bullshit." The profanity was so unexpected from his usually controlled mouth that she startled. "It's not right, it's not necessary, and I won't do it." "Kyle!" "No." He stood, pulling her up with him, his hands still framing her face. "I have spent my entire adult life doing what was necessary, what was expected, what was right for everyone except myself. I have been alone and bitter and convinced I didn't deserve love because duty came first." His golden eyes blazed with something that looked like desperation. "I won't give you up, not for my kingdom, not for my crown, not for anything. Even if people die because of me. People are dying because of Marcus and his Shadow Court allies, not because of you." Kyle's voice gentled. "But if you want to save lives, if you want to end this, then stand with me. Be my queen. Show the realm that love is stronger than fear, that damaged people can heal and broken things can be made whole." Lyra stared at him. This man who'd turned her entire world upside down, who'd looked at her brokenness and called it strength. "I don't know how to be a queen." "I'll teach you." His smile was soft, hopeful. "We'll figure it out together." For a moment, she almost said yes, almost let herself believe it could be that simple. But then reality crashed back in, Marcus's cruel laughter, the Shadow Court's power, the lives hanging in the balance. "I can't," she whispered. "I'm not ready for this. I may never be ready for this." The words echoed her panic from that first day in her garden, but this time Kyle's response was different. This time he pulled her against him, her forehead resting against his chest, his arms coming around her like a protective shield. "Then I'll wait," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "However long it takes, however difficult it gets, I'll wait." "What if forever isn't long enough?" Kyle's arms tightened around her. "Then I'll wait longer than forever if I have to." And in that moment, surrounded by armed soldiers and facing an impossible choice, Lyra felt something she'd thought Marcus had destroyed forever: hope. The confrontation took place in the great square of Kyle's capital city, with hundreds of witnesses pressed against the surrounding buildings and more watching from windows and rooftops. Lyra had never seen so many people in one place, their faces a sea of curiosity, fear, and desperate hope. Marcus stood at the centre of it all like a dark stain on the ancient cobblestones, flanked by 24 soldiers wearing the twisted silver insignia of the Shadow Court. He'd cleaned himself up since their last encounter. His hair was perfectly styled, his clothes expensive and well-tailored, his smile sharp as a blade. He looked exactly like the charming, dangerous man who'd convinced her she was lucky to be loved by someone like him. "There she is," Marcus called out when he spotted her and Kyle approaching across the square. His voice carried easily in the crisp morning air, pitched to reach every listening ear. "My little dove, looking rather royal. How lovely." Lyra felt the familiar urge to shrink, to make herself smaller, to apologize for taking up space. But Kyle's presence beside her was solid and warm, and his hand found hers, squeezing gently. "You don't have to do this," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "We can end this another way." "No." Her voice was steadier than she'd expected. "This needs to finish, for everyone's sake." Kyle squeezed her hand once more, then stepped slightly forward, every inch the Alpha King. "Marcus Voss, you were ordered to leave my territory. Instead, you've laid siege to my capital and allied yourself with enemies of the realm. Explain yourself." Marcus's laugh was exactly as she remembered, cultured and cruel. "Oh, your Majesty, surely you understand. I've simply come to collect what belongs to me. You can hardly fault a man for wanting his property returned." "She belongs to no one but herself," Kyle said, his voice carrying the absolute authority of his position. "Does she?" Marcus tilted his head, studying Lyra with those cold, calculating eyes. "Because from where I'm standing, she looks very much like a woman who's forgotten her place. Tell me, your Majesty, has she told you what she really is? Has she mentioned how she came crawling back to me, begging to be taken back, when she realized she couldn't survive on her own?" The words hit their intended mark. Lyra felt shame burn through her, hot and familiar. She had gone back to him. Once, when the loneliness and fear had become too much to bear alone. "Yes," Kyle said simply. "She told me. She also told me she left again and stayed gone." Marcus's smile faltered slightly. "She's damaged goods, your Majesty. Broken. I spent 2 years teaching her exactly what she's worth, and I assure you it's not much. She's adequate for warming a bed, and decent enough with her little healing tricks when properly motivated, but she has delusions of being something more than she is." Each word was designed to cut, to remind her of every moment he'd made her feel worthless. But this time, instead of crumbling, Lyra found herself getting angry. "I am not damaged goods," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I am a healer who has saved countless lives. I am a woman who survived your cruelty and built a new life from nothing." Marcus's eyes flashed with fury. "You are a pathetic little peasant who got lucky enough to catch a king's momentary interest. When he grows bored with his charity case, you'll come crawling back to me just like before." "She is my mate," Kyle said, his voice dropping to a register that made the very air seem to vibrate. "She is my equal, my choice, and the strongest person I have ever known, and she will never, ever belong to you again." The gathered crowd stirred at his words, murmurs rippling through the mass of people. The Alpha King's public declaration of his mate was binding, sacred, but Marcus wasn't finished. "Your mate?" He laughed, the sound bitter and mocking. "This broken little thing? She can't even stand to be touched, your Majesty. She flinches when men raise their hands. She wakes up screaming from nightmares. I made sure of that." His smile was poison. "What kind of mate can't even perform her most basic duties?" Rage swept through the square like wildfire, but it didn't come from Kyle. It came from Lyra herself, hot and bright and cleansing. 3 years of healing, 3 years of slowly rebuilding herself, and this man thought he could tear her down with a few cruel words. "You're right," she said, stepping forward until she stood slightly ahead of Kyle. "I do have nightmares. I do flinch sometimes. I carry scars from what you did to me." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "But you know what I also have? I have magic that can heal mortal wounds. I have knowledge that has saved hundreds of lives. I have strength that let me survive you, and wisdom that taught me to leave." Marcus's face was growing red with fury. "You ungrateful little—" "I have a mate who sees my worth instead of my wounds," Lyra continued, her voice ringing across the square. "I have people who respect me for my abilities instead of diminishing them, and I have enough self-respect to never, ever let you define me again." "Enough!" Marcus snarled, his careful composure finally cracking. "You think you're so much better now? You think you've changed?" He gestured to his soldiers, who began moving closer. "You're still the same broken little girl I found in the gutter, and when I'm done with your precious king, you'll remember exactly what you are." The threat against Kyle was the final straw. Golden light exploded from Lyra's hands as her healing magic transformed into something fierce and protective. The power that had always been gentle, nurturing, became a shield of pure energy that sent Marcus's soldiers stumbling backward. "Touch him," she said, her voice carrying supernatural authority, "and I'll show you exactly what this broken little girl can do." The crowd gasped as her magic flared brighter, responding to her emotions, to her absolute refusal to let anyone hurt the man she loved. Yes, loved. She could admit it now, standing here in front of hundreds of witnesses, her power blazing around her like a golden star. Marcus stared at her in shock. "That's impossible. Your magic was never that strong." "My magic was never that strong when you were telling me I was worthless," Lyra corrected. "Turns out power grows when you're loved instead of beaten down." Kyle moved to stand beside her, his own power beginning to radiate outward in waves of controlled authority. "You've made your position clear, Marcus. Now hear mine." His voice carried to every corner of the square. "This woman is my mate, my queen, and under my protection. Anyone who threatens her threatens me. Anyone who harms her will answer to me personally." The crowd erupted in cheers, the sound rolling across the square like thunder. But Marcus wasn't finished yet. With a snarl of pure rage, he lunged forward, a blade appearing in his hand as if from nowhere. "If I can't have her, no one can." Lyra saw him coming, saw the steel flashing toward Kyle's unprotected side, and reacted on pure instinct. Her magic lashed out, not to heal but to protect, wrapping around Marcus like golden chains and stopping him mid-strike. For a moment, the entire square held its breath. Then Kyle stepped forward, his hand closing over the blade with casual ease, his skin unbroken despite the sharp steel. "I told you," he said quietly. "She's under my protection. That extends both ways." With a gesture almost too quick to see, he disarmed Marcus and sent him sprawling across the cobblestones. The Shadow Court soldiers moved to intervene, but found themselves facing not just the Alpha King's power, but the furious golden magic of his mate. "Yield!" Kyle commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha addressing lesser wolves. "Yield or face the consequences." Marcus struggled to his knees, his face twisted with fury and defeat. "This isn't over. The Shadow Court—" The Shadow Court just watched their ally fail spectacularly in front of hundreds of witnesses, Kyle interrupted. "I suspect they're reconsidering their investment." Indeed, the Shadow Court soldiers were already backing away, their loyalty clearly extending only as far as their chances of success. Marcus looked around the square, seeing his support evaporate, his grand plan crumbling to ash. His eyes found Lyra's one last time, burning with impotent rage. "You'll regret this," he spat. "When you remember what you really are, when you realize you're not worthy of any of this, you'll regret choosing him over me." "No," Lyra said, her voice clear and certain. "I really won't." Kyle gestured to his guards, who moved forward to take Marcus into custody. "You're banished from this realm," he declared. "If you return, it will be considered an act of war." As Marcus was led away, still ranting about damaged goods and ungrateful women, Kyle turned to Lyra. The golden light of her magic was still flickering around them, but gentler now, warm instead of fierce. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Lyra looked around the square, at the hundreds of people who were looking at her, not with pity or disgust, but with respect, with admiration. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, cowering under Marcus's verbal blows, believing every lie he told her about her worth. "I'm more than all right," she said, reaching for Kyle's hand. "I'm ready." His smile was devastating. "Ready for what?" "For this, for you, for us." She took a deep breath, drawing on the strength she'd discovered in herself. "For everything." The crowd erupted in cheers again as Kyle pulled her into his arms, kissing her there in the middle of the square with hundreds of witnesses and golden magic swirling around them like a blessing. When they broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Lyra realized that for the first time in her life, she felt truly, completely free. 2 months later, Lyra stood in the centre of what had once been an empty wing of the royal palace, watching workers put the finishing touches on her healing centre. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the herb gardens visible through glass doors, the rows of treatment tables, the library filled with healing texts she'd collected from across the realm. It was everything she'd dreamed of and more. "The last of the students arrive tomorrow," Mira said from beside her, consulting the ever-present list in her hands. The baker's daughter had jumped at the chance to help organise the centre, her sharp mind perfect for managing schedules and supplies. 12 healers coming for advanced training, plus the 5 women who've applied for the specialised trauma programme. Lyra's heart clenched with familiar compassion. The trauma programme was her particular passion, teaching healing techniques specifically designed for those who'd survived abuse. Women like she'd been, who needed gentle hands and infinite patience to learn to trust again. "And the funding is secure?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "More than secure. Apparently, when the Alpha King publicly declares his mate's project a royal priority, people fall over themselves to donate." Mira grinned. "Half the noble houses have sent contributions, plus the Merchants Guild, plus 3 different temples. You could probably build 2 more centres with what's come in." The thought made Lyra smile. 2 more centres meant helping even more people, reaching communities that had never had access to advanced healing before. "Maybe we will." "Talking about expansion already?" Kyle's voice came from behind them, warm with amusement. "I thought you might want to see how this one goes first." Lyra turned to find him standing in the doorway, still wearing the formal robes from the morning's council session, but with his sleeves rolled up and that soft expression he wore only for her. Even after 2 months, the sight of him still made her breath catch. "How did the meeting go?" she asked as he crossed to where she stood. Lord Vance finally agreed to the new tax structure. Apparently, he decided that arguing with a king whose mate can turn her magic into weapons isn't worth the risk. Kyle's arms came around her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. "Though I think it had more to do with his daughter hearing about your centre and demanding he support it." "Good." Lyra leaned back against his solid warmth, marvelling at how natural it felt now, how safe. "The more support we have, the more people we can help." Mira cleared her throat diplomatically. "I'll go check on the dormitory arrangements, make sure everything's ready for tomorrow." When they were alone, Kyle turned Lyra in his arms so she faced him. "You're nervous about tomorrow?" It wasn't a question. After 2 months of learning each other's expressions, he could read her moods as easily as she could read his. "A little," she admitted. "What if I'm not ready for this? What if I can't help them the way they need?" "Do you remember what you told that young woman last week, the one who came from the eastern provinces?" Lyra smiled despite her nerves. "That healing isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up with compassion and doing the work." "Your own advice," Cale pointed out gently. "You've been showing up with compassion for months now, Lyra. You helped the village blacksmith's wife overcome her fear of touch after her assault. You taught the travelling merchant's daughter how to manage her panic attacks. You've already been doing this work." "But those were individuals. This is—" She gestured around the vast space of the centre. "This is so much bigger." "You're so much bigger than you were 6 months ago," Cale said softly. "Do you remember that terrified woman in the cottage garden who was convinced she was too broken to be loved?" Lyra thought about that day, about the panic that had consumed her when he'd first spoken of mates and bonds. It felt like a lifetime ago. She seems like a stranger now. Not a stranger, just someone who hadn't discovered her own strength yet. His hands came up to frame her face with that infinite gentleness she'd learned to trust. "You're the same woman, Lyra. You just believe in yourself now." "Because you taught me to." "No." His voice was firm, certain. "Because you chose to. I just reminded you of what was already there." The golden bond between them hummed with warmth, with love, with the absolute certainty that had grown between them over these past months of learning to build a life together. Lyra rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of gratitude for this man who'd waited for her to be ready. When they broke apart, she caught sight of movement in the garden beyond the windows. A young woman sat on one of the stone benches, her arms wrapped around herself, her face turned toward the afternoon sun. "She's early," Lyra observed. "Elena, from the northern mountains. She wasn't supposed to arrive until tomorrow with the others." Cale followed her gaze. Probably easier to travel alone, fewer people to see her scars. Lyra's heart ached for the girl. Barely 18, marked by burns across one side of her face and neck, sent away by a family who saw her as damaged goods. "I should go talk to her." "Are you ready?" Cale asked, and she knew he wasn't just talking about Elena. Lyra looked around the healing centre one more time. Her centre, the dream she'd built from nothing with the support of a man who believed in her worth. Tomorrow it would be full of healers eager to learn, women desperate to heal, hope taking root in places where only pain had grown before. "Yes," she said, and meant it completely. "I'm ready." They walked to the garden together, their hands linked, the late afternoon light turning everything golden. Eleanor looked up as they approached, her expression wary but hopeful. "You're early," Lyra said with a gentle smile. "I'm Lyra. We've been corresponding." "I know who you are," Elena said quietly. "Everyone does, the Alpha King's mate who turned her pain into purpose." She paused, then added with visible courage, "I was hoping you might understand what it's like to feel broken." Lyra sat down on the bench beside her, close enough to offer comfort, but not so close as to overwhelm. "I understand completely, and I'm here to tell you something that took me years to believe. You're not broken. You're surviving. And there's a tremendous difference between those two things." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "What if I'm too damaged? What if there's no hope for someone like me?" "Someone like you," Lyra repeated gently. "You mean someone brave enough to leave everything familiar and travel hundreds of miles to learn healing? Someone determined enough to help others despite your own pain? That doesn't sound damaged to me. That sounds extraordinary." For the next hour they sat in the garden and talked about scars and healing, about finding purpose in pain, about the difference between surviving and thriving. Kyle remained nearby, sometimes joining the conversation, sometimes simply providing the steady presence that had become Lyra's anchor. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Eleanor's expression had transformed from despair to tentative hope. "Thank you," she said, as they prepared to go inside for dinner, "for seeing worth in me when I couldn't see it myself." "That's what we do here," Lyra said, her voice full of conviction. "We remind each other of what's already there." Later that evening, after Eleanor had been settled in her room and the centre had grown quiet, Lyra and Kyle walked the palace gardens under a canopy of stars. The night air was soft and warm, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the distant sound of music from the village below. "I have something for you," Kyle said, stopping beside a fountain where moonlight danced on the water. "It's not my birthday," Lyra said, though she couldn't suppress her smile. "It's better than a birthday." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Lyra's breath caught. "It's the day I ask you to spend forever with me. Not because you have to, not because of the bond, but because you want to." The ring was perfect, a simple band of white gold, set with a stone that caught the moonlight and threw it back in rainbow colours. But it was his words that made her heart race. "Kale," she whispered. "I know we're already mated," he said, dropping to one knee beside the fountain. "I know the bond makes us partners for life, but I want more than destiny, Lyra. I want choice. I want you to choose me every day in every way that matters." Tears were streaming down her cheeks now, but they were tears of joy. "You know my answer." "Tell me anyway," he said, his golden eyes bright with love and hope and infinite patience. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong and absolutely certain. "Yes to forever. Yes to choosing you. Yes to choosing us every single day." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the bond between them flared to life. Not just the supernatural connection of mates, but the deeper bond of two people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to build something beautiful together. When he kissed her there beside the fountain, with starlight dancing on the water and their future stretching out before them like an endless garden of possibilities, Lyra marvelled at the journey that had brought her here. From the broken girl who'd been convinced she was worthless, to the woman who'd learned to see her own strength. From the terrified healer who'd whispered, "I'm not ready," to the confident queen who could say, "I choose this," without a shadow of doubt. As they walked back toward the palace, fingers intertwined, rings catching the moonlight, Lyra thought about all the women who would come to her centre. All the broken hearts that would learn to trust again. All the survivors who would discover their own worth. All the damaged souls who would realise they weren't damaged at all, just temporarily lost and waiting to be found. It was going to be extraordinary. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments below. I love hearing your thoughts about stories of healing, second chances, and finding the courage to choose love even when it feels impossible. If you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people hear these stories about the power of patience, the beauty of broken things made whole, and the truth that we are all worthy of love exactly as we are.